أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to episode 11 of the Dictations. Inshallah, if this is the first time you are following the Dictations, then I strongly recommend that you at least watch the first episode of this series so you know what this entire series is about, what was the plan that I had in my mind when I wanted to record this series. And if you have already watched a couple of the episodes, then welcome back again. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please make sure you do that. Like the video, share the video. And please do also leave comments. I do read them, all of them. I'm not getting thousands of comments. There's a couple of comments, so I do read all of them. And if I do get time to respond to them, I respond to them as well, inshallah. So that is that. The previous episode got a lot of interaction, and I was expecting that as well. But most of it, alhamdulillah, was all positive, and people seem to have appreciated that discussion on the istikhara. Today we're gonna do something completely different, and it might be a pretty new topic. And so before we do that, I just want to start off, as I always do, with something interesting, and that is about this book that no longer exists. So, as many of the viewers may know, that the 12 Shia have 4 primary books. Okay? And these primary books are Usul al-Kafi of Shaykh Kulaini, and then you have 2 books by Shaykh Tusi, and you have 1 book by a scholar named Shaykh Saduq, who died in 381 Hijri. And that book is called Man La Yahduruhu al-Faqih, meaning the book for one who does not have access to a jurist, does not have access to a faqih, and it is a compilation of a hadith, is a hadith compilation. So these are the 4 main books of the Shia, and Shaykh Saduq had more than 300 books. And of course, Shaykh Saduq is one of the most important scholars of the Shia. He lived in Ray, basically modern day Tehran. His grave is also in Ray. Now, what's interesting is most of Shaykh Saduq's books we don't have anymore today, right? So out of the 300 books, we just have, we have a decent amount, but we don't have most of them. Now, one of the books that Shaykh Saduq used to have is a book which the ulama that wrote bibliographies, like Shaykh Najashi and Tusi and other scholars, they say that even though the book Man La Yahduruhu al-Faqih of Shaykh Saduq, which was 4 volumes back in those days, the way it was published was 4 volumes, even though that was the main text of Shaykh Saduq, that's what he became famous for, he had another book which was called Madinatul Ilm. And that this book called Madinatul Ilm was 10 volumes. So it was way bigger than the Man La Yahduruhu al-Faqih, which became the primary text of the Shia, one of the primary 4 texts, primary 4 books. And this book called Madinatul Ilm was, way bigger than the other book of Shaykh Saduq, or any of the other books. 10 volumes in those days is a very comprehensive work. And the problem is that this book doesn't exist. We don't have this book anymore today, and it's lost. Okay, this book got lost. And this created a lot of interesting discussions amongst the ulama. Okay, they said, how can a book of that significance and that length, it just disappeared? Did the Shia ulama not care about this book? What an important book of Shaykh Saduq, even bigger than Man La Yahduruhu al-Faqih. How can it just disappear like that? So you should have at least, let's say you don't have the 10 volumes, at least 1 volume from it, 2 volumes from it. Something should have been preserved and something should have remained from it. But no, doesn't exist, unfortunately. So the question, there's many questions that you can ask over here, but one of the main questions that emerged out of this incident is that, okay, imagine we had that book today. Okay, imagine we had that book. Apparently it had, I think, 12,000 narrations in it. Imagine we had that book today. How much would our understanding of the religion would become different? Because clearly there must have been narrations in that book, in those 10 volumes, that we do not have access to anymore. They're lost. So is it possible that had we had access to those 10 volumes of Madinatul Ilm, that our understanding on certain theological topics, our understanding on certain fiqhi discussions may have been different? So obviously, many of the ulama say, yeah, it's possible. We would have had access to narrations that we don't have access to, and perhaps, if we keep doing ijtihad in every decade, every century, it is possible that scholars may have reached certain opinions, different opinions on certain matters. But many scholars also counter argue against that, and they say that, look, it does not seem that the book Madinatul Ilm had anything of significance that if we had access to it today, somehow our understanding of theology and our understanding of fiqh and akhlaq would have been so drastically different than what we already currently believe in. Okay, so this is a very interesting question to sort of think about. Like, what if we had access to the book today? Would we be a different would our madhab manifest in a different way, or would it be the way we are today? Like, no, all our salat would be the same way, our fiqh is, would be the same way. Well, clearly, yeah, it would be, to a greater extent, it would be the same way, but maybe in certain particular matters, maybe we would have had a very different opinion on things. Or more importantly, in certain theological matters, we would have had certain different opinions, because we would have had access to narrations that, maybe we've never even read anymore. Like, we don't know what was in that book. Now, there are some, a researcher who, a few years ago, basically did a research and collected all of the narrations from Madinatul Ilm that do appear in different books. So, like, the book was, available to other ulama in subsequent centuries, right? It's not like it just disappeared in Shaykh Saduq's time. No, it was there for centuries after Shaykh Saduq as well. But so ulama did quote from it. Later ulama came, they quoted from this book, and basically the scholar, decided to collect all of those narrations, whatever we have left from it, and they published it, in a book basically. So if you can see this book on the screen, it's not that long. It's like 128 pages, and from those 128 pages, I don't know, half of it is just like the research, right? The book is called ما وصل إلينا من كتاب مدينة العلم, right? So what has reached us from the book Madinatul Ilm of Shaykh Saduq, basically, right, by Shaykh Abdul Halim Awad al-Hilli. So this is a scholar, a researcher who has worked on it, and they have basically collected a lot of so it starts from here, I believe. So it starts from somewhere here, halfway through. And so look, in one of Sayyid ibn Tawus's book, Sayyid ibn Tawus is who I also quoted in the Istikhara Dictations, right? So Sayyid ibn Tawus is quoting from him in his book called Falah al-Sa'il. So anyways, they go from, they find the hadith and they basically collect it. And that's it. Like, it's a very short book, what's it called? Very few narrations, essentially. Now, based on this, it seems like if we had access to the book today, we probably were not much is gonna change if we even had the book today. So this is what some scholars are basically arguing for. So the reason why I started with this is to show that it's possible that there were a certain number of narrations in a book like Madinatul Ilm that no longer exist today, but nothing really, change. Perhaps nothing really would change if we had access to it today, the entire book. It's just, as I said, something I wanted to just mention, because oftentimes people say, many of the books of the Shia were lost in history, or many of the books were lost, even the Ahlul Sunnah, many of their books were lost in the attack by the Mongols, of the Abbasid, when they attacked the Abbasid Empire. Many of the books were lost and thrown into the river. Sometimes we say these things, but the people make this argument to kind of imply that, if we had those books and if we had not lost those books, a certain opinion would have been mainstream, or a certain idea would have been easier for us to argue for. But it seems like many of the ulama, so we're taking Madinatul Ilm as a case study here and saying, well, this is 10 volumes, but many of the ulama are saying that, look, it doesn't seem like anything would have changed over here, because if something was different in this book, other ulama would have quoted significantly from it. But the fact that nobody's really quoting from it, it seems that it was just a book where Shaykh Saduq perhaps put everything in it, kind of like similar to Bihar al-Anwar, maybe, where Alama Majlisi's project was just to collect narrations. Perhaps Madinatul Ilm was something very similar, just collecting narrations. And from the reports that we do have in that that work that I just showed, the narrations are not anything mind-blowing or outstandingly unique, or something that will change your entire worldview or anything. No, it seemed very simple, simplistic narrations, how to do ghusl and how to do, some narration about dua or imamat. So it's very mainstream stuff that even other books have, and other narrations mention the same thing. So perhaps nothing would have changed. So when, let's say, books were lost in history, yes, definitely, we lost very valuable narrations at times, but is it really the case that if we had those reports and if we had those narrations today, or those books, our worldview would be so significantly different that we would be a different madhab, for example? That obviously is, kind of hard to argue. I'm not undermining the loss that could have come in. Inshallah, we will discuss today that perhaps there were narrations that we lost, that if we had them today, perhaps our opinion would be significantly different on some topics. Inshallah, we will go through that today. But most of the times, it doesn't seem like anything significant would have changed. Like, it's not like you would end up, believing in 13 imams or something, if you had some narrations that were missing. No, you're 12 imami, and the reason why we know this is because you can see the practice of the ulama. The ulama, there's like a unity on many of the ideas, the main fundamentals, the main concepts in fiqh and theology. So you kind of, attain certainty from that. Now, today's discussion, though, is also about, quantity. Okay, so the reason why we started with this Madinatul Ilm is because we're talking about a book that had a large quantity of narrations in it. And we want to focus on this topic of quantity today, actually. Okay, I want to show you something. This is Usul al-Kafi, volume 1 of Usul al-Kafi. Okay. Now, when you look at Usul al-Kafi, you go to Kitab of Tawhid in volume 1. Okay, Kitab of Tawhid. Right? So, Kitab of Tawhid. Now, Tawhid is the main pillar of Islam. Okay, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. The entire point of Islam was La ilaha illallah. Right? There's no God but Allah. It's Tawhid. It is the most important and fundamental concept in Islam. Right? It's not something up for debate or anything. No, that's what Islam is all about, believing in one God. Now, I want you to look at something. So this is al-Kafi, right? The main text of the Shia. The main text of the Shia. You want to learn about Shi'ism, you come to Usul al-Kafi, volume 1. Okay, so now I want to learn about Tawheed. And you look at Tawheed, and you look at, these right here. Right here. Okay, this entire section is basically Kitab of Tawheed. Right here. Which is basically, how many? Less than 100 pages. Okay, less than or just let's just say, yeah, it's actually less than 100 pages. Okay, almost 100 pages. Okay, 97 pages is basically the entire Kitab of Tawhid is 97 pages. Okay. Now look at this section. Okay, so look at now this section. This section is, almost 400 pages. Okay, I don't know the exact number, but 400 pages of Kitab al-Hujjah, the book on the Hujjah of Allah on earth. Imamat, let's say, or Hujjah basically means Imam or the Prophet, but Imamat is focused on Imamat. So your main Shia text has less than 100 pages of narrations on Tawhid, the most important concept in Islam, and 400 pages on Imamat. Okay. How could it be that a topic that is more important, it is more fundamental, it is the crux of Islam, has less than 100 pages in your most important text of Hadith, Usul al-Kafi, right? So you don't have a more important text than that. And the Imamat discussion is 400 pages. Are you trying to tell me that, Imamat is more important than Tawheed, than God? This is something that someone can raise as a question. Okay. Now, this is an important question because many times we say, well, such and such topic, the Imams have spoken about this topic, such and such topic so many times, and therefore that topic is way more important than some other topic that the Imams maybe spoke about 4 or 5 times, a few times. Where is this discussion, where does this discussion arise in the Islamic sciences? Okay, so I want to show you that Usul al-Kafi thing because we're going to talk about it now. When we study legal theory in the Hawzat, in the seminary, we study something called legal theory. There is a discussion that pops up called al-Tazahum. Okay, I will briefly explain what this tazahum is. Tazahum means that imagine you are, walking on a street, and there is a blind person trying to cross some street or something. Okay, there's a blind person who is trying to cross some field or whatever. Now the field is the property of someone else. Okay, and you cannot trespass onto someone else's property. Okay, so let's say you have 100 narrations saying that it is haram to trespass onto someone's property. Okay, 100 narrations saying it is haram to trespass on someone's property, and 20 narrations in the entire corpus that say it is wajib or it is good. Let's say it's not even wajib. Let's say it says it is mustahab to help somebody in need. Okay, let's just say it's not even wajib. It just says it's mustahab. Okay, what do you do in this situation? Could you say that because we have more narrations on the prohibition of trespassing, therefore I'm not going to help that blind person because I don't want to commit a haram. I don't want to commit a haram to just help someone, even though they could fall, or for example they could injure themselves. I don't want to do a haram deed over here. Now, this is not a contradiction. This is not called a contradiction in the technical sense, because these are two separate rulings. Allah can say trespassing is haram, and Allah can say it is mustahab to help someone who is in need. These two are not contradictions. But when it comes to the real practical world, sometimes they can come together and it can be in a conflicting situation like this one. Okay, the conflict here is that you want to help someone, right? And you can help them. It's not some physical thing that's preventing you. No, you can help them, but you have to trespass onto someone's property, which is a second set of ruling that says it's haram to do that. Okay, what do you do? Can we say that because the narrations on trespassing are a vast majority of narrations say it's haram, and only 5-6 narrations say it is good to help somebody who is in need, therefore the prohibition is far more severe and more significant and is more important to not trespass than to help someone, can we use quantity as a variable over here to make that decision or no? That is the entire discussion. So likewise, can we say over here that just because there are less than 100 pages in Usul al-Kafi about Kitab on Tawhid and more than 400 pages on Kitab of Hujjah, that the discussion on the Hujjah of Allah is more important than the discussion of Tawhid? Can we say that or no? Okay. Shahid Sadr. Okay, I want to basically, in this discussion, we want to quote from Shahid Sadr. Okay, Shahid Sadr, what a amazing scholar he was, who unfortunately was martyred and killed by Saddam at a very young age, right? So at a very young age, and it was a big loss for our ummah. So anyways, he has this discussion in his Bahs al-Kharij basically. But this is a common discussion now in the Hawzat. It's called tazahum. Someone can say, well, there are other ways to make a decision in this scenario as well. So someone can say that sometimes you can use qualitative variables to figure out what's more important. So for example, it may say that if you trespass, Allah will punish you in this world. Okay? But then it says, if you help someone in need, someone like a blind person, Allah will give you, ajr in the akhirah. Or it may say, if you do not help someone who is in need, Allah will punish you in the hereafter. So someone can say, look, so this is a qualitative variable, meaning someone can say that because the punishment mentioned for trespassing is in this world, whereas the negative consequence and the punishment for not helping a believer or someone in need is in the hereafter, which is more significant, more severe. Therefore, I don't care if there are 100 narrations on trespassing. The consequences for not helping a believer or a blind person is far more severe, and therefore we should help the person who is in need. So there are some qualitative variables that you can use to make these decisions as well. But we're saying, let's assume we don't have anything like that, and all we have is just quantity to go by. All we have are numbers. All we have are 50 narrations here and 100 narrations over there. Then what do you do? Okay, we will go through 4 or 5 reasons, 4 or 5 explanations to show that, as a matter of fact, quantity on its own is not enough to argue or to prove that one topic is more important than another topic. Okay, we're going to go through 4 or 5 reasons to show why sometimes some narrations, we have far more narrations on a certain topic, but in reality it is not as important as another topic which has fewer narrations in our books. So that's what we're going to discuss in this episode. 4 or 5 reasons that Shahid Sadr says why we see certain narrations on certain topics that are in the hundreds, but on certain other topics which are so important, but we have a very handful of narrations on them. There are a couple of reasons that we can look into, and we will quote from Shahid Sadr. Okay, so what does Shahid Sadr say? Shahid Sadr says, look, one reason that this happens is that sometimes you have a subject matter, you have an issue that is something that is commonly faced by society every single day. Okay, every single day. So I have, Jam al-Hadith somewhere, basically, here, I should have pulled it out. I think somewhere here, I have where is it? Yeah, right there at the bottom. You can even see it over here. Jam al-Hadith, this is a compilation of Shia fiqh hadith by Ayatollah Burajardi and his team. Now, if you look at this set of hadiths, you will notice that, for example, Kitab of Tahara and Kitab of Salat, Kitab of Tahara is 2-3 volumes, Kitab of Salat is 4 volumes. So you have 4 volumes on just hadith of Salat. Okay, what does that mean? it means that salat is something the Muslims pray every single day of their lives. Okay? So naturally, because it is a daily occurrence, likewise tahara. Okay, people use the toilet every day, you need to do wudu every day, there's ghusl issues that come up and all sorts of issues in tahara. Because this is a common issue that society faces, naturally you will have much more questions being raised about it and a lot more answers being given about it, and therefore you're going to have a far more a far more number of hadiths on the topic, as opposed to, I don't know, something like khums, for example. Khums maybe is once a year. Once a year the question pops up. Okay, so because it's once a year, people are only concerned about figuring the answer out in a very limited number of days that they want to figure out the answer. But tahara and salat and these type of matters that are daily business transactions, people have questions about it all the time. So naturally you will have more questions about it. Now, just because we have 4 volumes on salat and you have only 400 pages on imamat in your books of hadith, that's not enough to say that imamat is less significant than salat. You can't say that, right? Because salat is something that's a daily issue, daily practical issue. So people are going to ask more questions about it. So that's one reason that you can argue that, look, quantity is not enough to argue for the importance of a topic. Okay, second point Shahid Sadr says. He says sometimes the political and the societal context of the Prophet or the Imam, allowed them to speak openly about a certain subject, or and did not allow them to speak about a certain subject openly. So what do we mean? For example, all the jurists of Medina and Mecca and Kufa and Basra, everyone is giving lessons on the topic of Hajj, for example. Okay, everyone's talking about Hajj. This Sunni jurist is talking about Hajj, that jurist is talking about Hajj rulings and how to perform the Hajj. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and Imam Baqir alayhi salam, they're also talking about Hajj. You're going to have a lot of topics, a lot of issues, discussions about Hajj. Okay, so they are allowed to speak about it, but then there are issues, there are certain matters that the Imam cannot always speak about it openly because of the political and the societal issue. For example, we have narrations where Imam Baqir alayhi salam or even Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, they are literally telling their companions, don't talk about imamat publicly. Do not transmit some of the narrations on the topic of imamat to other people because it's going to cause problems. So look, you have cases where the Imam is telling people not to transmit on a topic which is far more important than Hajj, imamat, right? It's a theological topic. It's a theological matter. It's far more important than some of the legal matters of Islam. So, but the Imam is saying, don't transmit. Well, if he says that, well, naturally you're going to have fewer narrations that are recorded in the hadith books. Okay. So why is that happening? It's happening because the context is not allowing the Imam to speak openly about it. Because if he speaks openly about it, or if he allows his companions to just openly narrate these traditions, well, it will create political problems for the Imam. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that we have, very interesting. So I will show you something. We have a book where in the Safavid era, everything seems to have happened in the Safavid era. By a scholar named Muhaqqiq Karaki. Okay. نفحات اللاهوت في لعن الجبت والطاغوت. Okay, it's a book by Muhaqqiq Karaki. Okay, Muhaqqiq Karaki, if you read about Muhaqqiq Karaki, extremely important scholar from Lebanon, and he was invited by the Shah, the Safavid Shah, to Lebanon, to Iran, to Persia. So he died in 1534, right? So it's 16th century, and look, I'm showing you why this whole quantity thing is important, and the whole idea of societal and contextual reasons. He says, Muhaqqiq Karaki, and by the way, Muhaqqiq Karaki is a very, very influential figure. He is, perhaps single-handedly, he has, changed the trajectory of tashayyu in Iran. And some people even say he is one of you can consider him to be the first wali al-faqih, the jurist, first person who was kind of like a wali al-faqih. He was with the Shah of the Safavid Iran, and he would advise them and guide them and all, and his opinions had a lot of influence on Iran. There's a lot of discussions about Muhaqqiq Karaki, but he was a solid scholar. Like, he's not some street guy. No. This is a very significant scholar and extremely, extremely solid and strong and influential. But look at what he says, though. Look, his whole idea is that the reason why we don't have so many narrations about, where the Imams are cursing those people who usurped the rights of Imam Ali. The reason why we don't have them is because, historically speaking, the Imams never had a chance. Like, they could not openly say these things. Correct? So he writes an entire treatise, which has been published right here. He writes an entire treatise saying, and look at what he says in the introduction of this treatise. Right? He says, Allah has removed the calamities or the hardships from this ummah. How did Allah remove it? Allah removed it by, placing the strong and noble government of the Safavids. Allah has helped them with Nasr, with helping them, and helped them with the angels, with the help of the angels and the humans and the jinn ajma'een, all of them. And Allah has uplifted their slogan, their political policies, and has belittled the status of those who do kufr. Okay, and basically the Ahlul Sunnah, who he calls Ahlul Bid'ah, the context, the political context of the world has flipped opposite. So he's basically saying, for all of these centuries after the Holy Prophet, the Ahlul Bid'ah have been ruling the Muslim Ummah. Now, for the first time in history, the tables have turned. Okay, so what is he saying? He says, وَأَنَا, now, finally, it is the time that for those who have basira, we are going to explain to them what these Ahlul Bid'ah, okay, so he's referring to Ahlul Sunnah, what they hid and fabricated and made up, okay, about the about the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt and the Fir'auns of those who would rule the Muslim world. Talking about the Khulafa, okay, right? He's talking about the Khulafa, and he says they refer to them as the Khulafa of the Prophet, bi Khulafai Rasulillah. He's like, these people didn't have any ilm or anything. So he's basically saying that, look, for many centuries, these Ahlul Bid'ah have been ruling the Muslim Ummah, and they have confused the masses. Okay, they have played with the masses, and they have made them believe that those Khulafa, early Khulafa, were the rightfully guided caliphs, and but they completely hid from the society the oppression that has happened against the Ahlul Bayt. But now, finally, now that the Safavid government is here, the Shah is here, Shia government is here, finally I have now the time to expose basically the fraud. So this, we're not giving any opinion on what Muhaqqiq Karaki does in this Risala. Maybe that's a different dictation. But what I'm trying to show here is that there's an assumption that Muhaqqiq Karaki is making here. The assumption that Muhaqqiq Karaki is making here, that, you know what? if the Imams had the opportunity, they would have really said a lot of stuff, and they would have really exposed the Khulafa even more than what we have right now. Okay, this is what Muhaqqiq Karaki is trying to allude to, and that's actually what the whole treatise is about. And in this entire treatise, he's not just trying to prove that it is allowed to curse some of the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt. As a matter of fact, he is trying to argue that it is mustahab to curse. Okay, that's a fiqhi opinion of Muhaqqiq Karaki. One of my teachers has refuted Muhaqqiq Karaki, at least on one of the arguments which he tries to make from the Quran. I will drop the link for that in the description, which is critiquing Muhaqqiq Karaki from this treatise, actually. But my point here is something else. My point is that the lack of authentic and a significant number of narrations where the Imams are actually cursing the Khulafa and exposing them, reliable narrations, because there are so few. Muhaqqiq Karaki is saying this is because of societal reasons, the political context. They were unable to say it, and we were unable to spread it. But now is a time where the tables have turned, and we will now expose them. This is very interesting because many people will say today, or many researchers will say today, because there are such few narrations, they make another argument. They say this shows that the Imams did not want to make this a public culture. Okay, the Imams, doesn't seem like the Imams wanted to make this form of tabarri, this form of disassociation, which is through public cursing and so on, some sort of a identity or a norm in the Shia culture. So you see how the arguments are moving. One person is saying that the reason for the fewer narrations is because of societal reasons. That's why we have few reliable narrations. Other side is saying, no, we have few narrations because some of the Imams didn't even want this to be a culture. So now you have to figure out, this is what the research requires you to do. Someone like me, I would take a second opinion. If you're familiar with my research and my opinions and stuff, I would take the second opinion. I would say no, it doesn't seem like they're even promoting this as something that should become a public culture, right? So we would critique Muhaqqiq Karaki on that point. But the real point here is how the lack of quantity can be employed as an argument for your own opinion in this very unique way that Muhaqqiq Karaki is trying to do. And he writes it in his introduction that finally the tables have turned, the political context has changed, and now allow me to expose the crimes of the Khulafa. So that is second point that Muhaqqiq Karaki basically mentions. The Shaykh Saduq mentions, sorry. Okay. Now, there's a third thing that Shaykh Saduq mentioned. Shaykh Saduq says that, look, at times, the nature of the subject matter is such that it could, if you're living in a certain society or a certain culture, certain community, it's very easy to forget that topic and kind of become heedless of it. So in order to continue to emphasize and remind people of a certain topic that people can become heedless of, the Imams would keep talking about that topic. Okay, and probably the best example of that is temporary marriage. Okay, now we have a lot of narrations on temporary marriage. In fact, sometimes you look at the narrations on temporary marriage and it seems like it is more important than even permanent marriage, because of the way that the narrations mention, if you do temporary marriage, you get this reward. If you do ghusl, because of while you're in a state of temporary marriage, you get this type of reward. For every drop that falls down from your ghusl, you get this much reward. It's like, okay, wait, we don't even have those narrations for permanent marriage. And someone like Shaykh Mufid wrote an entire risala, wrote an entire treatise with over 40 narrations on just temporary marriage. And when you go through the reports, you will think this is the only type of marriage that is ideal, and this is the only one that is desired. And perhaps you might think that even permanent marriage can't come close to this. This is next level merits and sawab. Okay. I will just quote one narration just to show you, the type of so let me just quote the very first narration from the treatise. Okay. From Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. It says يستحب للرجل أن يتزوج المتعة وما أحب للرجل منكم أن يخرج من الدنيا حتى يتزوج المتعة ولو مرة. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, it is mustahab for every individual to perform mut'ah. I dislike for one of you Shias to leave this world without having performed it at least once. Okay, so this is how the treatise is starting. And if this is how it's starting, well, then you can imagine, it's going to keep getting more and more, like the merits of and mentioned in the narration is going to keep getting higher and higher. So if it is starting like this, it seems like, wow, they're praising it so much. But when, Shaykh Saduq or someone like Shaykh Saduq he will say, no, but this doesn't mean this is more important than permanent marriage. The reason why at that specific time the Imams are talking about this so much is because the general society doesn't accept it. And they say it's haram or it's a bid'ah or whatever. They say they don't believe in it. And if you are living in a culture where there's a dominant view that something is not allowed or something is not acceptable, well, you will kind of merge into that culture and you will also start seeing it as a taboo and as something which is not right and not acceptable and we shouldn't do it. So to counter that culture, the Imams have to speak about it. And they have to keep reminding their followers, look, this is not haram. Don't think this is bid'ah. This is something that is the Prophet allowed. You cannot just make something haram that the Prophet did not make haram or it was halal in the Prophet's time. So because of that, you all of a sudden have dozens and dozens and dozens of narrations on temporary marriage, and perhaps even permanent marriage doesn't have that many narrations. Perhaps, I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm saying perhaps it doesn't have that many narrations as temporary marriage. But that would not mean that permanent marriage is less important than temporary marriage. It wouldn't mean that. Temporary marriage then is temporary. So it's not more important than permanent marriage. Right? But the reason for that, so I'm saying look at the reason. The reason why you're seeing a more quantity over here is because the Imams are just at that specific time are just fighting against a certain cultural taboo. And hence why you're seeing this increase in it. Whereas permanent marriage, nobody's against it. Everybody is fine with it. So there's no reason for the Imams to be speaking about it so much. Okay, so that's a third thing that Shaykh Saduq says. A fourth reason why sometimes you see a greater quantity of narrations is that a certain event may have taken place. Okay, for example, in the Abbasid dynasty, a lot of new theological topics were being raised, especially about Allah and His attributes, His kalam. Is the Quran, or for example, the creation of the Quran, is the Quran created or it is uncreated? Can you see God with the physical eyes? And so you had all of these type of discussions that were happening at a certain time. And because those discussions popped up at a certain time, well, you have narrations about that topic for that reason. If those topics never popped up, perhaps you wouldn't have had any narration on that topic, right? So sometimes you have narrations, a lot of narrations on. So for example, let's say we have certain narrations about the is the Quran created or is it uncreated? Okay, and let's say you have many topics on this discussion. If you look at Ayatollah Khoi, Sayyid Khoi, in his book called Al-Bayan, it's a tafsir book. He has a little bit of not a little bit, it's a pretty significant introduction that he has written. He says in his book that this topic of whether the Quran is created or uncreated, he says it is such a useless topic of discussion. It has no impact on your life. So that's something Sayyid Khoi says is such a pointless topic. He's saying, why were the Ahlul Sunnah even debating this? What's the point of this debate? Right? So something that he says has no value, well, we have narrations on it. But the reason why you have narrations on it is because this was a debate that was happening in the Muslim world. So the people are also asking the Imams. Well, the Imams are answering that question. But just because you have narrations on it doesn't mean anything. It does not signify the importance of the topic. It's actually not that important. This was somebody else's debate. People started asking the Imams questions, and the Imams decided to answer it, and they got preserved. Okay. The fifth factor that we can mention, and this is something that Shahid Sadr does not mention, but one of my teacher mentions this. So I'm quoting from one of my teachers, not Shaykh Saduq. And he says that, look, one of my teachers, he says that sometimes you see a greater quantity of narrations on a certain topic and fewer narrations on a certain other topic, because the scholar or the transmitter of the hadith had a certain view, certain worldview, certain opinion, and therefore they intentionally only promoted certain types of narrations on certain topics and kind of, didn't focus a lot on some other type of narrations. Okay. For example, the Imam could have spoken 50 times about, 50 times about some matter, whatever matter. And he speaks about, let's say he speaks 50 times about a topic, but the narrator, because he's unsure, is this even correct? Like, he's getting the narrations based from, after a couple of decades or a century. And they're looking at these narrations, but they are kind of unsure, could the Imam even say this? Or this is a solitary report and my aql doesn't accept it. There are all these reasons why a scholar or a transmitter may not accept a certain narration. Because they don't accept the narration, they will just quote, from those 50, they will just quote it 10 times in their books. But the Imam in reality could have spoken about it 50 times. Okay, but because there is an opinion of the scholars involved, you have certain set of narrations. I mean, this is very well known in the, if you study early Shia history, it's well known. You had debates happening in Qom and Baghdad. The scholars of Qom would narrate and preserve certain type of narrations. Scholars of Baghdad would preserve certain types of narrations because they had certain affinities and certain ideas. Or, for example, they would not narrate from certain scholars and transmitters because they disagreed with them. They disagreed with their opinion. So, for example, if you look at the book of Najashi, Rijal of Najashi, this is the book of a bibliographical work by one of the major Shia scholars of Rijal and Fahrist. He gets to the section of a scholar named Ibn Junayd. Okay, Ibn Junayd was a Shia scholar. Okay, he was a Shia scholar, but there are some opinions about him that perhaps he believed in qiyas, which what the Ahlul Sunnah do. But there's a lot of discussion on that. What did he mean by qiyas even? I don't want to get into that. But look at what Ibn Junayd. Look at the name of a book that Ibn Junayd had, which we no longer have today. Okay, and this is what I was talking about right in the beginning of the episode, that sometimes perhaps that when a book gets lost, perhaps if we had it today, we could have had a different opinion on certain topics. He had a book which is called Kitab إظهار ما سطره أهل العناد من الرواية عن أئمة العترة في أمر الاجتهاد. The book on the book of exposing that which the people of stubbornness concealed or hid from the narrations of the Imams of the Itra, meaning the Ahlul Bayt, on the topic of ijtihad. So he wrote an entire book or a treatise perhaps, recording the narrations where the Imams are talking about ijtihad. Ijtihad at that time meant qiyas, okay, which Ibn Junayd is supposedly, someone who believes in it. As I said, what did he believe in? We don't know. There's different theories on it. But if we had this book with us today, maybe we could have known what did he really mean, because it seems that he had access to certain narrations by the Imams on the topic of ijtihad and qiyas, which he is saying that the Ahlul Inad, meaning the stubborn people amongst the ulama, they have hid it, they have concealed it. And even though they are narrations of the Imam, so he wrote a whole book compiling these narrations. But what does this show us? It shows that certain scholars who did not accept qiyas, which is the mainstream Shia opinion, perhaps they felt uneasy with these narrations, and perhaps that created doubt for them. Are these even truly from the Imams or not? So they did not even preserve them in their books, and they kind of just abandoned them. But Ibn Junayd is saying, no, there are narrations on it. Look, we can perhaps come at a more nuanced opinion on the topic of qiyas. But we don't have those narrations anymore because a group of scholars did not decide to preserve them. And therefore, you now have almost no narration that you can use to justify and defend Ibn Junayd's opinion today anymore. All that we have today are narrations completely against ijtihad and qiyas. When I say ijtihad, I mean qiyas over here. Okay, this is a discussion for another topic, but ijtihad, when it's used in the earlier books of hadith and even fiqh and stuff, they're referring to qiyas, which the Ahlul Sunnah do. Look at Shaykh Saduq. Okay, Shaykh Saduq has a book called Kitab of Tawhid. Okay, so this is a real Kitab Tawhid. You can see, alhamdulillah, the Shia do have a lot of narrations on Kitab on Tawhid. So, don't think Usul al-Kafi we had less than 100 pages. No, this is a Kitab of Tawhid of Shaykh Saduq, and this has, alhamdulillah, a lot of pages. If I were to just look at I have the book open over here. If I were to just go to the last page, this is 400 pages on its own. Okay, 400 pages, but it has been translated by it's been translated by Maulana Sayyid Ali Raza Rizvi, the famous speaker and scholar, primarily Urdu speaking scholar, but he does lecture in English as well sometimes. So this is translated by him, Ali Raza Rizvi. In this part, when it comes to the chapter of the chapter, I believe, is chapter 8, regarding the ru'ya of Allah. Can you see Allah? Okay, because as I said, there was a time where this became a debate. Some of the Ahlul Sunnah say you can see Allah. The Mu'tazilis and the Shia say you cannot see Allah. So we have narrations on it. But Shaykh Saduq is quoting narrations, and then all of a sudden he says, the traditions that have been transmitted regarding this subject and which our elders have mentioned in their writings are authentic. As far as I'm concerned, they are reliable narrations. However, I refrained from transmitting some of them in this chapter, fearing that some ignorant people may read them and interpret them literally. So basically, there are some narrations in the Shia books. Apparently, we had narrations from the Imams. According to Shaykh Saduq, authentic narrations from the Imams where it was perhaps possible to read them and misinterpret them and end up believing that you can see Allah with your physical eyes on the Day of Judgment. So Shaykh Saduq is saying, look, I did not transmit those narrations, even though I believe they are authentic, but I didn't want to transmit them because some people may read those narrations literally, and they may end up saying, yes, we're going to see Allah with our physical eyes, and they may disagree with those narrations, which is the mainstream Shia opinion, and because of their disagreement that we cannot see Allah on the Day of Judgment, they may end up rejecting these narrations. They may say, no, these are fabrications. Well, if you say a hadith is a fabrication, what you're really doing at that point is you are saying the Imam didn't say this. Okay? But someone like Shaykh Saduq is afraid to do that. He says, you're going to negate the words of the Imam just because you didn't understand it, and you are going to do kufr. Okay, you're going to do kufr out of your own ignorance. The point that I'm trying to make here is that there are certain narrations that supposedly we had, which if you kind of just read them literally or apparently, you would get the idea that we can see Allah with our own eyes, just like the Ahlul Sunnah believe in today. But because Shaykh Saduq, obviously the Shias don't believe this, Shaykh Saduq also does not believe in it, he is not mentioning them in his book. Okay, because he says, look, not only do I not agree with them, but some people may end up rejecting them or may end up misinterpreting them and taking them literally. So in order to avoid that, I'm not even going to transmit them. So what are these narrations? We don't know. Right? We don't know what Shaykh Saduq is talking about because they haven't been preserved for us. Perhaps, in some other works they are preserved, but in this book he doesn't preserve them. So now all of a sudden you have certain narrations which are far more in quantity, and a certain other set of narrations which are less in quantity or non-existent actually, but perhaps the Imam spoke about that topic far more than the narrations that we have in our books. Okay, so this was a little bit of a technical episode, and it was intentional. right? Because I don't just want to keep it always entertaining with the intellectual history. Sometimes I want to get a little bit technical because there is an audience for it, niche audience for it. And the main reason for this topic was to kind of just show you the possibilities that exist when it comes to interpretation and understanding and decision making. It's called in tazahum. That just because, you know, something is more in number, it does not mean it is more important necessarily speaking, right? Just because you see, oh, well, this set of narrations is a lot more, you know, where can this be applied? So this just came to my mind right now. Sometimes we say, oh, like a lot of the reformists and certain modernist trends in Islam amongst the Muslims, they make this argument. They say, oh, the Quran only has 600 ayat of fiqh and ahkam, right? But the majority of the Quran is akhlaq and tawhid. Therefore, the fiqh is not even that important. This is a very common argument that is used. But today we can see that, wait, you know, perhaps that's not really true. Who said fiqh is not so important? Just because you have 600 ayat, majority of the Quran was revealed in Mecca. 13 years was revealed in Mecca, and most of the surahs are revealed in Mecca. Well, there is no fiqh in Mecca, so it's ethics. So naturally, you will have more ayat about akhlaq and theology, and Medina is a shorter period, and you will have fewer ayat over there. In terms of the different topics that are talking about. Despite that, 600 ayat is still significant. 600 ayat in Medina is still a significant number, right? So my point here is that someone can say, no, just because there are more ayat of akhlaq and tawheed doesn't mean that the fiqh is less important than the akhlaq, right? Because the reason for the greater quantity of ayat of akhlaq was simply because there's a longer period of time of the revelation in Mecca. Right, so that could be a response to that, right? I don't personally agree with this response, but I'm just giving out possible responses. I don't believe in this response. I do believe akhlaq is more important, and it's the foundations of the fiqh. But it's just something that we can think about. Now, question is this: what if all things are equal? Okay, all things are equal. You have 50 narrations on tahara and 50 narrations on so let's say you have 50 narrations on the istihbab of gargling your mouth. Okay, it is very mustahab to gargle your mouth in wudu. When you're doing wudu, cleaning your mouth is very, very mustahab. Okay, you have 50 narrations on it. And then you have 100 narrations saying doing a longer dhikr in salat is also mustahab, very mustahab. And all things are equal, meaning both of salat and tahara are topics that are daily being used equally. Tahara and salat go together. There's no political problem over here. There's no contextual issue over here. There's not a certain incident is happening here. No. All things being equal in the society and in the context, the Imam spoke 100 times about doing dhikr in salat, doing extra mustahab dhikr in salat, and he spoke 10, 20, 50 times in his entire life about, it's mustahab to gargle your mouth when you're doing wudu. If all things are equal, can we then argue that because the quantity of the narrations on the dhikr of salat are more, that the Imam was indeed emphasizing that act, that the extra dhikr in salat is more important than gargling of the mouth? Okay, so where could this scenario come in? For example, your time is very short. Okay, you have to quickly do wudu and salat time is very short. And, if you start gargling your mouth and, throwing water in your mouth a couple of times and then spitting it out, well, you're going to end up wasting a minute or two, let's say. And you know what? You have very short, and you will not be able to do extra dhikr in salat because the time is very short. Okay. If you were stuck in this type of a situation, what should you do? Should you gargle, your mouth and clean your nose and ignore the dhikr, read the salat short? Or should you ignore the gargling of the mouth, just do the wajib part of the wudu, and spend that extra minute or two in doing the extra dhikr? What should you do in this situation? What's more important? Some scholars have said that when all things are equal, it is very, very possible that the narration with the subject with the greater narrations, the Imam is mentioning the importance of the benefit and the the criteria that is in the greater in the subject which has greater narrations is more important. Okay, it is more significant. So in a scenario where all things are equal, the narration or the subject that has greater narrations is going to be a much more important in a case of tazahum, for example, that we're talking about. Remember, this entire discussion is happening under the scenario of tazahum, where you have a practical conflict that is appearing for you. So that is an overall discussion that I wanted to do today, in today's episode. Inshallah, those of you who followed along and could understand some of the points, I hope that you could appreciate the level of thinking that goes into interpretation and understanding the religion. There's a lot more at stake than just sort of saying, oh, this topic has 100 narrations and this topic only has 2 narrations. Well, the 101 is going to be more important. No, there could be many reasons why a certain topic has 100 and a certain topic only has 5. Doesn't mean that the topic that has 5 narrations is less significant or less important, as we went through the narrations of the ideas of Shahid Sadr in this episode. Could have been many, many reasons, and that therefore requires one to further investigate and either establish that there was a reason why a certain topic has more narrations, or eliminate those possibilities and get to the conclusion that no, everything was fine, there was no other variable involved, and therefore the one that has more narrations is in fact more important and should be more preferred. So inshallah, that's all for today. As I said, don't forget to subscribe and share and like the video, and please drop the comments, leave the comments as well if you can. Other than that, inshallah, we will see you in a next episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.